June 1945. A pale dawn over New York Harbor. A grey troop ship groans past the Statue of Liberty, its decks packed with captured German soldiers, and one 18-year-old girl pressing both arms tight across her belly. Under her loose, stolen uniform, a secret life kicks against her ribs. In Germany, they warned her, if the Americans find out, they will rip the baby from you. Better to die than fall into their hands. Now the ship's engines fall silent, gulls scream, and the smell of diesel and cold river air mixes with something she never expected in a prison: fresh coffee and clean hospital soap. She braces for chains and fists, but the first touch on her skin is from an American nurse in white, not with hate, but with gentle hands on her swollen stomach. How did the monsters from the posters become the only people she could trust to save her child? And what happened to that baby after the war? Stay with me to the very end to find out. And if you want more true World War II stories like this, please like this video, subscribe to support the channel, and watch the full story unfold. In the last weeks of Hitler's Reich, the world around her was falling down. It was May 1945 in a small town near the Rhine. Houses were burned out, glass crunched under boots, smoke hung low over broken streets. In the cellar of a half-ruined school, 18-year-old Anna Keller sat in a faded field grey uniform and wrapped a strip of cloth tight around her stomach. She had been a signals helper, sending messages for an army that no longer existed. Now she was a prisoner, and she was 5 months pregnant. Her officers had told the girls, if the Americans take you, they will shame you. If they find a baby, they will tear it from you. Better to die here than fall into their hands. Anna believed them. She had seen what German papers printed: stories of enemy cruelty, photos of bombed German cities blamed on Anglo-American murderers. In her mind, crossing into American control meant walking into the wolf's mouth. The Americans came at noon. Tanks clattered over the cobblestones, their engines deep and steady. The air smelled of diesel and hot metal. White flags and sheets hung from windows. The German commandant had already vanished. A loudspeaker in rough German ordered all soldiers to step into the street with their hands up. Anna climbed the steps with the other women, knees shaking, cloth biting into her skin under the tunic. Outside, the scene looked nothing like the terror she expected. Tired GIs in dusty uniforms pointed rifles, yes, but most looked more bored than cruel. One sergeant walked past the line of women, eyes scanning faces, weapons, rank badges. When he reached Anna, his gaze rested for a second on the way she held her arms folded across her middle. Then he moved on without a word. Within hours, Anna and hundreds of other prisoners were loaded into trucks. The wooden sides smelled of old hay and sweat. They drove past fields where farmers were already back at work, and past towns where white sheets still fluttered like ghosts. At a transit camp on the edge of the Ruhr, barbed wire glittered in the sun, and searchlights stood over long rows of tents. There were lines, roll calls, body searches that made Anna bite her lip and hold her breath. Somehow the rough hands never noticed the slight bulge under her belt. Rumors ran through the camp like electricity. They are sending us to America. No to work in French mines. No to Siberia. An older sergeant who had fought in Africa said quietly, "If you must go somewhere, pray it is America. I was their prisoner once. They feed you." The men around him laughed bitterly. How could a country that rained fire on Hamburg and Dresden be generous to German soldiers? To Anna, the idea sounded like a cruel joke, but the rumor was true. One morning, they marched them to a rail siding where American boxcars waited. The metal was cool under Anna's fingers as she climbed in. The train rolled west for 2 days, past rivers, ruined bridges, and fields dotted with white crosses. At Le Havre, on the French coast, the smell of the sea hit her. Seagulls cried over long docks crammed with Liberty ships and grey transports. By war's end, the United States would hold more than 370,000 German prisoners of war on its own soil. Anna was now one of them. Her group was small, just under 2,000 men and a few dozen women auxiliaries guided up a gangway onto a converted troop ship. The metal steps rang under their boots. Inside, the air was thick with oil, soap, and old sweat. Triple bunks climbed the walls like ladders. Life at sea was a strange half-world. Days blurred. A bell marked mealtimes, white bread, watery stew, sometimes even coffee with sugar. It was more than Anna had eaten in months, yet every bite turned in her stomach. The Atlantic swell lifted and dropped the ship, and the smell of diesel and cooking fat pressed into the steel air. At night, with the light bulbs humming overhead, she lay on her narrow bunk, one arm across her belly, willing it to stay flat. "Do not let them see you," she wrote in a tiny notebook she kept hidden in her boot. "If they know, they will punish you, and the child will die. And it will be my fault for surviving." Her fiancé, a mechanic in a panzer unit, had been reported missing near the Oder in February. In her mind, he was already dead. The baby he had left inside her was the last piece of him in the world. She would not let the enemy take that too. On the 12th day, the mood on deck changed. Men crowded the railings, pointing and shouting. Anna squeezed between shoulders until she could see it. A distant line of grey coast, then the sharp green shape of an island, and finally a huge statue rising from the water, copper skin turned pale and strange. Behind it, towers and chimneys, and a low cloud of city smoke. New York Harbor. It smelled of salt and coal smoke and something sweet she could not name. They were sailing straight into the land she had been taught to fear. Yet as she watched the cranes move, the ferries dart, the windows flash in the sun, another thought crept in. Here there were no bomb craters, no burned-out streets, no hungry children fighting over potato peels. The enemy country looked untouched, almost calm. For Anna, this was the sharpest paradox of all. She had left a 1,000-year Reich that lay in ruins and entered the land of the victors as a captive, yet everything about this place suggested safety, order, and food. This was not propaganda, it was reality, and it did not fit any story she knew. The ship's siren blew, long and low, tugboats nosed them toward the pier. Guards shouted orders in English. Soon there would be fences, barracks, and the feared medical check that might expose the life she hid under her uniform. What waited in that first examination room would challenge her terror more than the voyage ever had. The ship's engines fell quiet. Metal scraped as the gangway swung into place. Orders snapped across the deck in English. The prisoners were lined up and sent down the narrow stairs in single file. Anna kept one hand on the rail, the other tight across her middle. The steel steps were cold through the thin soles of her boots. Below, the smell changed from oil and sweat to tar, river water, and strong coffee drifting from somewhere on the pier. On the dock, American soldiers waited with clipboards instead of clubs. Their uniforms were clean, their boots shined, rifles slung easy over their shoulders. One corporal walked along the line, counting under his breath. 2,000, give or take, he muttered to the sergeant beside him. By that summer, ships were landing that many German prisoners in the United States every week. Anna did not know the number, but she could feel the scale of it. The line of grey uniforms seemed to go on forever. She braced for blows, curses, spittle. None came. The sergeant at the head of the line pointed them toward a row of waiting trains, then went back to his notes. To him, this was a job, not a chance for revenge. The paradox hit her like cold water. She was a defeated enemy, yet no one even touched her. The train rolled inland through the night. The wooden seat was hard under Anna's legs. The car smelled of damp wool, coal smoke, and the sour tang of fear. Outside, she caught glimpses of wide rivers, then dark forests, then open land under a big sky. When dawn came, fields spread to the horizon, dotted with white farmhouses and red barns. This was Iowa, she heard someone say, a place she had never imagined, but would now remember all her life. By afternoon, the train slowed beside a fenced compound on the edge of a small town. Guard towers stood at the corners, their windows glinting. Inside the wire, long barracks stretched in rows, but there was also a neat flagpole, a vegetable garden, even a baseball field marked out in chalk. Prison and playground, side by side. "Only the winning team has bats," a guard joked to another, and a few of the German men smiled in spite of themselves. At the camp gate, a painted sign read, "Prisoner of War Camp, U.S. Army, capacity 10,000. It was one of more than 500 such camps spread across America. Behind that simple number stood strict rules. Under the Geneva Convention, the United States had to give prisoners the same medical care and rations as its own troops. On paper, at least, Anna had rights she had never enjoyed in Hitler's Germany. Processing began in a long wooden building that smelled of disinfectant and damp wood. The prisoners were split by sex. The few dozen women were led to a side wing, away from the men. A female officer in khaki, her hair pinned tight under a cap, checked a list. "You go to medical," she said slowly in German, pointing down a hallway. Her accent was clumsy but kind. Anna's legs felt heavy. Medical meant undressing. Undressing meant her secret would be seen. Inside the exam area, white curtains hung from metal rails, forming small cubicles. The buzz of electric lights filled the air. A nurse waited behind one curtain, dressed in white with a blue cape folded over a chair. Her name tag read M. Lewis, RN. She looked about 50, with tired eyes and a firm mouth. When Anna stepped inside, the nurse gave a small nod, then pointed gently to the hooks on the wall. "Clothes," she said. "Bitte." The German word sounded careful on her tongue. Anna's fingers shook as she unbuttoned her tunic. Underneath, the rough cloth strip around her belly was clearly visible, wrapped too tight. Nurse Lewis's eyes went to it at once. For a heartbeat, Anna thought she saw anger. Instead, the older woman's face softened. She stepped forward and with careful hands touched the edge of the binding. She did not call the guards. She did not shout. She reached back and pulled the curtain fully closed, the metal rings scraping softly on the rail. Then she called out a name. Another nurse appeared, younger, with red hair tucked under her cap. Behind her came a woman in civilian dress with a small badge marked Interpreter. "My name is Elsa Bauer," the interpreter said in clear German. "I was born in Chicago. My parents came from Bremen. I am here to help you talk to them." She nodded toward the nurses. "They want to know how far along you are," Elsa said. Anna stared. 5 months, she whispered. "Maybe a little more." Nurse Lewis held up 5 fingers, then rested her palm flat against Anna's belly, very gently. Through Elsa, she spoke in short, careful phrases. "You are not in danger because of this. The baby is not a crime. American rules say we must care for you. We will do that. I promise." Anna's throat closed. The first hands to touch her bare skin since her fiancé's embrace were not brutal, but gentle. In that bright, strange room under the American flag, the old stories from German radio cracked like thin ice. This was not propaganda, it was reality, and it did not match anything she had been told. Later, in her diary, Anna would write, "The enemy nurse held my hands like my own mother. She spoke words I would not have believed a week ago, that my child had a right to live, even in the country that bombed our cities." The exam continued. Blood pressure, pulse, a cold stethoscope pressing lightly to her side, quiet nods. A note in a chart that marked her, in neat English script, as pregnant, special diet. When she was allowed to dress again, Nurse Lewis handed her a folded blanket. "For you," Elsa translated, "and later for the baby." Outside, the evening air was cool and smelled of cut grass and cooking from the camp kitchen. Barbed wire still shone under the sunset. Guards still paced the fences. But now, as Anna walked toward the women's barracks, the life inside her felt a little less threatened. She still did not trust this place. She still feared what the coming months might bring. Yet a promise had been given, and that promise would shape every day that followed, as work, food, and quiet kindness slowly began to replace terror. The bell rang at 6 in the morning, sharp and cold. For a moment, Anna thought she was back in the barracks in Germany. Then she smelled something she had not known there for a long time, frying eggs and toast. The women in her hut pulled on their clothes and lined up outside. Dew wet their boots. The sky over Iowa was wide and pale, with a faint smell of cut grass and coal smoke from the camp kitchen. Inside the mess hall, long tables waited. American cooks in white aprons moved behind the counter, ladling food onto metal trays. When Anna's turn came, a hand dropped 2 scrambled eggs, a thick slice of white bread with a square of butter, a spoonful of stewed fruit, and a tin cup of coffee into her hands. It was more than she had eaten in a day back home. Under the Geneva rules, each prisoner here received roughly 3,000 calories a day, almost the same as a US soldier. She stared at the yellow eggs, soft and warm. "For prisoners?" she whispered in German. Beside her, an older woman named Lotta, a former nurse from Cologne, shrugged. "Eat now, ask questions later," she muttered. Around them, spoons clinked, cups rattled, and the smell of coffee filled the air. Anna took a bite. The eggs were rich and almost too much. The bread was fresh, not the sour, black mixture of barley and sawdust she had known during the last winter of the Reich. Later, in her diary, she wrote, "Today I ate more than in 3 days at home. The strange thing is, it is the enemy who gives me this. What am I supposed to feel? Grateful? Ashamed?" The days in camp soon settled into a rhythm. After breakfast came roll call, then work. Most of the men marched out through the gates under guard, heading to nearby farms and factories. Across the United States that year, more than 350,000 German prisoners were used as labor, picking corn, cutting timber, loading grain. The women stayed behind the wire. Some worked in the laundry, where steam and soap stung the eyes and wet cloth slapped against metal drums. Others sewed uniforms or peeled potatoes in the kitchen. Because of her pregnancy, Anna was given only light duties. Nurse Lewis had written no heavy lifting in her chart. So Anna was set to work in the camp library and office, stamping books, sorting files, and later helping to translate simple notices into German. The paper felt smooth under her fingers, the room smelled of ink, dust, and the faint must of old American novels. Every few days, Nurse Lewis or the younger nurse, whose name was Joan, stopped by the women's barrack to check on her. They listened to the baby with a stethoscope, cool against Anna's skin, and felt the curve of her belly. Through Elsa, the interpreter, they asked, "Any pain? Any bleeding? Are you eating enough?" Anna answered in short, stiff sentences at first. Trust came slowly. One afternoon, Joan arrived with a small brown bottle. "Vitamins," Elsa explained. "The doctor says you need more iron." On another day, a guard brought an extra glass of milk to her tray. "For the kid," he said, in halting German, grinning. His breath smelled faintly of tobacco and mint. The paradox was sharp. Men in the same uniform that had killed her countrymen were now trying to keep her child strong. There was a camp canteen too, a low building near the fence. Prisoners who worked earned a small wage, up to 80 cents a day in camp coupons. With these, they could buy cigarettes, soap, writing paper, and sometimes chocolate. The first time Anna walked in, the shelves made her stop. Metal tins shone, bright wrappers crinkled. A Hershey bar sat in a row with others, deep brown under the glass. Joan saw her stare. She pointed to the chocolate, then to Anna's stomach, and smiled. "Good for morale," she said. Elsa laughed and translated. "She says it makes you happy. A happy mother is good for the baby." Anna hesitated, then used 2 days' pay on the bar. That night she broke off one square and let it melt slowly on her tongue. The taste took her back to a fairground in Munich before the war, when her fiancé had bought her a sweet from a stand. Tears came without warning. Not everything was easy. The barbed wire was always there, glittering under sun and moon. Searchlights swept the compound at night. A wrong move at the fence could bring a shouted warning or, in rare cases, a shot. Some guards were cold, faces shut like doors. Some prisoners swore never to speak to an American except when forced, but others bent in different ways. On Sundays, a chaplain held services in a wooden hut. Hymns rose in 2 languages. On summer evenings, the guards sometimes let the men play football in the yard while they watched from the sidelines, smoking. Lotta joked, "If this is prison, I wonder what peace will feel like." Yet she never forgot that beyond the wire, German cities lay in ruins. Letters were allowed, up to 2 a month. Red Cross rules saw to that. The forms were small, with tiny boxes for each letter, but they were a lifeline. Weeks after she wrote her first note, Anna received a reply from home. The paper shook in her hands as she read her mother's words, telling of bomb damage, missing neighbors, and hunger. There was no mention of the baby. They still did not know. "A strange thing," Anna wrote in her diary after that. "Here, as a prisoner, I have more food than my family in Germany. I sleep in a clean bunk, and a foreign nurse worries about the child in my belly. The world has turned upside down. It would turn further still." As the months passed, more news filtered into the camp. Names of places like Buchenwald and Dachau, photographs in American magazines, quiet comments from Elsa, and the nurses about things the German press had never printed. The stories of kindness and full plates would soon stand beside stories of cruelty and mass graves, and Anna would have to decide what to believe about her own side and about the people caring for her now. The news came on thin paper and in blurry black and white pictures. One hot afternoon, the Americans pinned several photographs to the notice board by the canteen. Men in striped clothes, piles of bodies, a gate with the word Buchenwald above it, another with Dachau. The photos smelled faintly of ink and chemical fixer. A few prisoners laughed uneasily and said, "More enemy lies." Others stared in silence. Elsa stood beside Anna, reading the English captions. "These are camps your government ran," she said, quietly, in German. "The Americans have opened more than a dozen like this in the last months. They say millions of Jews and others were killed." The number was unreal. 6 million was more than the people in whole regions of Germany. Anna shook her head. "We heard nothing," she answered, though even as she spoke she remembered whispers, rumours of labour camps in the east, words cut off when an officer walked by. Now, inside an enemy camp where she ate good food and saw nurses worry over her baby, she was looking at proof of crimes done by her own side. It was another cruel contrast. The country that had told her it was defending civilization had built these places. The country she had been told was barbaric was feeding and protecting her. A few days later, a guard called her name. "Interview," he said, in slow German. Her heart raced. Interrogation was a word that tasted of fear. She followed him to a small wooden hut near the fence. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the clack-clack of a typewriter. 2 American officers sat at a table strewn with papers and maps. Elsa waited by the door, ready to translate. They offered her a chair, and to her surprise, a white mug of coffee. It was strong and bitter, with a hint of sweetness. "We know you worked in signals," the older officer began. "We want to ask about your unit. Names, places, nothing more." His voice was tired, not cruel. They asked about call signs, radio codes, locations of old headquarters that no longer existed. As she answered, the younger officer's fingers flew over the typewriter keys. Their questions were sharp but controlled. No one shouted, no one struck her. At the end, the older man took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Did you know about the camps?" he asked suddenly, his voice flat. "No," Anna said. "We heard nothing clear." She felt her cheeks burn. Whether it was shame or anger, she could not tell. Outside afterward, under the bright sky, Elsa walked with her for a few steps. "They lost men in those places," she said. "Some soldiers helped to free prisoners and found only bones. That is why they ask." Then she added, "My father comes from Bremen. When the war began, our neighbors in Chicago looked at us with fear. He lost his job at the factory. They said he might be a spy. We were not put in camps like the Japanese here, but we learned how fast people can blame whole families for what governments do." In the library later, with dust motes dancing in a slant of afternoon sun, Elsa's words came back. "People are not governments," she told Anna one evening as they shelved books together. "A flag does not tell you if a person is kind or cruel. You have seen this yourself. Some Germans here are brutal, some Americans here are gentle. It is the same everywhere. Anna thought of the boyish guard who sneaked her extra milk, of the camp cook who had once asked Elsa how to boil potatoes the German way, so the women would like them more. She also thought of the SS man who had slapped her hard across the face for dropping a stack of files in 1943. Same uniform as hers, same anthem, different heart. One warm night in late summer, after a checkup, Nurse Joan lingered by Anna's bed. Crickets chirped outside the open window. Faint cheers drifted from the baseball field, where prisoners and guards watched an evening game. Joan sat on the edge of the bunk and pulled a small photo from her pocket. The corners were worn soft. "This is my brother, Tom," she said, and Elsa translated. The picture showed a young man in an American uniform smiling in front of a tent. He went ashore in France in 1944. He died in the Ardennes that winter. We got a telegram. My mother cried for a week. Anna swallowed. "And you care for Germans?" she asked. Joan looked at her for a long time. "I could hate you," she said slowly. "Sometimes I want to. But hate will not bring Tom back. If I let it live in me, it will only make more pain. When I help you, maybe it stops a little of the hurt. Maybe your child will grow up in a world with less of this." Later, in her diary, Anna wrote, "An American nurse with a dead brother holds my hand and listens to my baby's heart. A German American whose family was mistrusted tells me that people are more than flags. The war taught us to see only enemies. Here, behind barbed wire, I begin to see faces instead." The camp did not become simple. There were still hard guards, hard words, sudden anger when news of trials in Nuremberg reached them. Numbers came, 6 million Jews, 11 million dead in all the camps, and sat like stones in the prisoners' minds. But another truth sat beside them. The same nation that showed those pictures was the one making sure a German prisoner's baby would enter the world strong and alive. As the leaves outside the barracks began to turn, sharp and red in the autumn air, pain started to wake Anna at night. Her back ached. Her belly grew heavy. The world beyond the wire was changing, with headlines about trials and new borders. Inside her, something else was coming closer, a different kind of turning point that no court or government could control, the day her child would be born, under the stars and stripes. The pains started in the dark before the morning bell. At first, they were small, like a tight band across her lower back. Anna turned on the thin mattress, trying to find a better position. Outside, the wind tapped a loose board against the barrack wall. The air in the hut was warm and heavy, smelling of wood, wool blankets, and the faint sourness of many people sleeping close together. Then a sharper cramp made her gasp. Something inside her shifted, low and deep. Lotta, on the bunk above, peered over the edge. "Already?" she whispered. Anna could only nod, teeth clenched. Within minutes, another wave came, stronger. Lotta swung down, pulled on her boots, and hurried out to the guard at the door. Soon, boots thudded along the path. A lantern beam cut into the barrack. "Infirmary," the guard said, his English clipped. He helped Anna into a blanket-wrapped coat and onto a small handcart they sometimes used for laundry. The night air hit her face, cold and sharp, full of the smell of damp earth and coal smoke. Above the black shape of the fence, stars shone hard and clear. At the infirmary, light spilled from every window. Inside, the world shrank to white walls, metal trays, and the clean, sharp smell of disinfectant and carbolic soap. Nurse Lewis was already there, grey hair loose around her tired face, still buttoning her uniform dress. Joan moved quickly at her side, laying out instruments that gleamed under a bright lamp. Elsa hurried in, her coat unbuttoned, hair loose from its pins. "They woke me," she said to Anna in German, catching her hand. "I told them we will need time. First babies are slow." Dr. Miller, the camp doctor, appeared from his small office, pulling on a white coat. He checked Anna with calm, practiced hands. "It has begun," Elsa translated. "You are strong, the baby is well placed, but it will take many hours." His voice was steady. He could have been talking about a long walk. They settled into a rhythm that had nothing to do with guards, schedules, or camp bells anymore. Hours passed. The second hand on the wall clock went round and round. Outside, the camp woke, whistles blew, trucks started, work parties marched out to nearby farms. Inside the infirmary, the sounds were different. Anna's hoarse breathing, the creak of the bed, the soft murmur of nurses' voices, the clink of metal basins. By midday, sweat slid down Anna's back. Her hair stuck to her forehead. The sheet under her was damp. Between contractions, Elsa wiped her face with a cool cloth that smelled faintly of starch and soap. In all these camps, with more than 370,000 German prisoners, births like this are rare, she said quietly, but the doctor has seen them before. You are not the first woman to bring a child into the world behind this wire. Once, when a particularly fierce wave of pain passed, Anna gripped Elsa's hand so hard the interpreter winced. "I am sorry," Anna gasped. Elsa shook her head. "Do not be. I was not in labor when this war began, but I was in fear. My father lost his job because of his accent. There were days when I thought nothing good would come again. Now I see this, and I think maybe we were wrong." As the sun dropped, the light in the room turned golden. The doctor checked again, his face concentrated. "Not long now," Elsa translated. Joan leaned close to Anna's ear. "You are doing well," she said in English over and over, the same 3 words like a song. Anna did not know all the meaning, but she understood from the nurse's eyes. Outside, the camp loudspeaker crackled the evening call. Inside, they did not notice. The world had narrowed to one bed, one woman, and the small life pushing toward air. At last, close to midnight, Dr. Miller's voice changed. "Now," Elsa said, her own breath quickening. "Again, one more." Anna pushed with everything left in her. For a heartbeat there was only roaring in her ears. Then suddenly the room was filled with a new sound, a thin, angry cry, sharp as a trumpet. Dr. Miller lifted a small, red, wriggling form. Joan wrapped the baby in a clean, soft blanket that smelled of sunshine and laundry soap. She laid the bundle in Anna's shaking arms. The weight was so light it made Anna cry harder. The baby's skin was warm and slightly damp. A tiny fist waved, fingers like pink commas. "A girl," Elsa said, laughter in her voice for the first time that day. "A strong girl." Nurse Lewis bent over them, eyes bright. "Beautiful," she whispered in English. She did not need a translator for that word. For a moment, nothing else existed. No barbed wire, no ruined cities, no loudspeakers, no numbers in terrible headlines. There was only a mother and her child, and the quiet joy on the faces of people who, on paper, were her enemies. In the morning, when the sky outside was turning pale and the camp bugle sounded reveille, Anna lay propped up on clean pillows. The baby slept against her chest, breath soft and warm. Elsa sat by the bed with a notebook. "They need a name for the records," she said gently. "Have you chosen one?" Anna looked down at the tiny face. Dark hair, small nose, serious mouth even in sleep. "Frida," she said. "From Frieden, for peace. I want her to belong to a quieter world." Then she swallowed, glanced at Joan, who stood nearby with tired, hopeful eyes. And Joan, for the nurse who stayed all night. She smiled shyly. "Frida, Joan." Elsa repeated it in English. Joan's hand flew to her mouth. "You don't have to," she began, but stopped when she saw Anna's look. "In my country they told us you would hurt my baby," Anna said slowly in German, and Elsa translated. "You did not. You saved her. I want her to remember that, even if I am not here to tell her." Later that week a report went up the chain of command. It listed numbers, illnesses treated, teeth pulled, vaccines given, and one live birth to a German prisoner. To the War Department, it was one line among thousands. To Anna, it was everything. Years afterward, she would write, "My daughter first opened her eyes under a flag I had been taught to hate. The hands that caught her wore the uniforms of my enemies. But when she cried, they did not ask whose side she was on. They only asked if she was breathing well." As autumn deepened, Leaves blew across the camp yard, and rumors of repatriation began to rise. Anna watched Frida grow heavier in her arms, her cheeks rounder, her eyes more curious. The wire was still there, the guard towers still stood, yet each day, when the nurses weighed the baby and smiled, the distance between prisoner and protector seemed a little smaller. The next change would come not from a ward or an office, but from the outside world, calling these captives home to a broken country and an uncertain peace. The order came on a cold morning in early 1946. Frost silvered the camp yard, and the guards' breath showed in white clouds as they called roll. "Prepare for transport," the officer shouted in German. "You are going home." The word home hung in the air like smoke. For months, the wire and the barracks had been Anna's whole world. Here, she had eaten 3 meals a day. Here, her daughter had been born. Outside the fence lay a Germany she could hardly imagine now. Burned cities, broken bridges, families counting the missing. The paradox was sharp. She had arrived in America terrified of prison. Now part of her was afraid to leave. There were numbers behind the order. By the end of 1946, almost all of the 370,000 German prisoners held in the United States were shipped back across the Atlantic. The war was over. The victors did not want to feed enemy soldiers forever when Europe itself was starving. On the day of departure, the camp smelled of coal smoke and damp rope as men rolled up mattresses and women folded their few clothes. Nurses came to say goodbye. Nurse Lewis hugged Anna briefly, her hands lingering on the baby's back. "You take care of her," she said, and Elsa translated with a tight throat. Joan handed Anna a small bundle, a baby blanket, a spare bottle, a black and white photograph of the 3 of them in the infirmary. "So she will know us?" Joan said. The train to the coast rattled through bare fields and small towns. Frida slept against Anna's chest, warm and solid. At the port, another huge ship waited, its hull smelling of rust and sea salt. This time, as she walked up the gangway, Anna was not hiding her belly. She held her daughter in full view, wrapped in a soft American blanket. The crossing was rough. Waves thudded against the hull, and the wind howled in the rigging. The air in the women's quarters was thick with the smell of metal, wool and babies, milk, talcum powder, sour cloth. Yet there was a strange comfort in the motion. "We are between worlds," Anna wrote in her notebook. "I left Germany as a soldier and came to America as a prisoner. Now I leave as a mother and a witness." They landed at Bremerhaven, a harbour of cranes and grey water. Warehouses stood shattered along the quay. The cold smelled of coal dust and damp timber. From there, crowded trains took them south through a land of gaps. Whole city blocks were missing, replaced by piles of brick and open sky. In some places, chimneys rose alone from empty lots like black fingers. At a transit centre near her hometown, Anna stepped down onto a cracked platform with Frida in her arms. Her parents were waiting. Her mother looked smaller, wrapped in a worn coat that smelled of wood smoke. Her father's face was lined deeply, his shoulders stooped. For a heartbeat, he stared at the baby and said nothing. Old ideas about shame, about fraternization with the enemy, still lived in many minds. Then he reached out, with rough, cold hands, and took Frida carefully, as if she might break. The baby blinked and made a small sound. "She has his eyes," he said quietly, naming Anna's dead fiancé. He would have wanted her to live. The hard line in his jaw loosened. In that moment, the weight of old rules began to crack. Life in the new West Germany was not easy. Food was tight. In 1947, the average adult received less than 1/500 calories a day. Coal ran short in winter. Yet slowly factories restarted. New houses rose where ruins had stood. The sound of hammers and saws mixed with the ring of church bells and tram bells. Children played in streets cleared of rubble, their shouts bright in the cool air. Frida grew up hearing 2 kinds of stories. At school, she learned about the economic miracle, about new highways and full shops. At home, she heard about bomb nights, air raid sirens, and the long train rides of prisoners. And on quiet evenings, when the kettle hissed softly and the smell of tea filled the small kitchen. Anna told her the story of an American camp in Iowa. She spoke of white bread and eggs when Germany starved, of fences and baseball fields standing side by side, of pictures on a notice board that showed crimes done in her name. She told of a grey-haired nurse and a young red-haired one who did not ask whose uniform she had worn when they heard her baby cry. As a young woman, Frida studied nursing. She said, "If American nurses could care for my mother in 1945, then I can care for anyone who comes to my ward, no matter their language." In the 1960s, she travelled to England on an exchange programme. The first time she heard English spoken all around her, she thought of Joan and Elsa's voices mixing German and American words over a hospital bed. Old prisoners also began to travel. In the 1970s and 1980s, former POWs returned to the United States as tourists. Some visited the small towns near the camps where they had once worked the fields. Farmers who had hired them shook their hands as equals. One man wrote in a letter, "We came to America in handcuffs. We came back in rented cars and were met with coffee and cake." Anna did not cross the ocean again, but when Frida brought her a photo of an Iowa cornfield on a hot summer day, the green rose stretching under a wide blue sky, she could almost smell the warm earth and the faint scent of diesel from the camp trucks. "I remember," she said. "Once I thought those people would kill my child. Instead, they kept her alive." In her old age, when her hands shook and her eyes grew dim, Anna wrote one more line in her diary. "We entered that camp as enemies of America. We left it as students of its mercy. The Reich that sent me there lasted 12 years. The lesson I learned behind its barbed wire has lasted a whole lifetime. They had come as conquerors. They left as students, from those small rooms and quiet acts. An extra glass of milk, a shared photograph, a promise kept in the middle of the night. A different kind of bond grew, one that no order from Berlin or Washington could have planned. It stretched from ruined German streets to American farm towns and on into a Europe where former enemies would build a future side by side. In the end, this story is larger than one girl, one baby, or one camp in Iowa. It sits at the meeting point of two great opposites, a war of tanks and bombers, and a few people in white coats choosing care over cruelty. The numbers of the conflict are huge. Tens of millions dead, roughly 11 million German soldiers held as prisoners at one time or another. Yet the detail that endures is a nurse's hand on a frightened young woman's shoulder. They had come as conquerors, they left as students. The United States and West Germany later stood together in NATO, traded goods, and sent their children on exchanges instead of into battlefields. Behind those big changes lie thousands of small choices like the ones in that infirmary. In the end, America's greatest weapon was not its tanks or its planes, but its decision to treat even its enemies as human.